Okay, I'm going to take you through the whole workflow from the Grove 10 in Blender all the way to Unity. In Unity, we're using the Nature Manufacture assets to create our environment. So I'm going to show you how to take the trees you've grown with the Grove and make them work in Nature Manufacture. So here we go. I'm not going to do every single step of this, just mostly the things focusing around conversion. So for instance, I'm going to show you how to model a tree in the Grove because we have it here. That's for you to do, but it's really the conversion that's taken a while to get perfect. So starting off, I've got this tree in the Grove 10 using Blender 2.9. And it is as it is. I haven't done anything to try to make it specially modified for file translation. That's where we'll pick up. But there is one thing that's a little different about this tree versus the sort of standard tree as it's grown in the Grove. And that's how I've got the twigs set up. So I'm going to start with that. You'll see here that the number of tries I have, or faces, is 117,000 more or less. We want to get it lower, but that's a good starting point for our tree. That's because I've created a special version of twigs that's really low poly. I'll show you kind of the default way it works. To start with, let's just do the sort of standard mapping of our twigs folder to the ones that come with the Grove. Beautiful twigs. I mean, just gorgeous. High fidelity. We get a huge amount of triangles if we go in, if we actually try to render a tree to prepare it as an FBX file. So we don't want to do that because it works amazingly in Blender. And that's because these are instanced versions of twigs that are sort of just referencing the external twigs file, which is a brilliant setup. But when we actually sort of bake these in and make them actual geometry, it could be 500,000 faces, and we don't want that. So what I do is a couple things. So here's my Grove add-on folder. So here's where all our twigs and their materials are sourced. I usually make another copy of that and I call it low poly. Actually, I'll just make a folder and say low poly, and I'll actually just put a copy of each of the twig files I want in here. And then actually I'll just make it a lot smaller. And so I'll show you the difference between these. So this is just something I do. It's not like the standard way of working or how recommended by the people who make the Grove. Okay, so I'll open up each of these twigs and I'll modify them. You usually don't have to do this at all when you're using the Grove. You can see here. Hang on. I'm just going to set this to no clipping. So what we have here is beautiful geometry, really amazing. I mean, the modeling on these is spectacular. However, you can see that just for a single twig file, it's just shy of 7,000 tries. And if we have, like 50 to 100 of these in our tree, it's just a huge amount of tries for our model. So what I usually do is I'll make a copy of this into my low poly folder, and then I'm not going to show you how to do this, but I'll show you where I got with it. Is 73 tries. I go in and I delete the branch, the buds, and I take all of my, I even take the stem, which is just an image and it's usually separately mapped, and I just make it part of the same geometry here. Okay, so you can see how these map. And I then move these all closer together, right? So they're more or less touching, no branch. Right, so it looks kind of funny when you render it. However, for what I'm trying to do, which is whole tree visualization and multi-tree groves, we don't need to see the branches. We're looking for the overall form of the tree and the character. Then these will work really well. This is probably the single biggest thing you can do to reduce the cost of your tree in Unity is to make a low poly version of the twig. Okay. So then what I'll do here is I'll go into the add-on setup and I'll remap my twigs folder to my low poly folder. And now I only have a few choices. I've got a couple versions of this pin oak. I just want to make sure this is the cheapest one. Yep, I can tell by looking at it. I had a slightly more intense one. So this doesn't actually do anything to your try count at the moment, but it will when you prepare it for Blender. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this. I'm going to close Blender 2.9. I've just found that the next step works a little better and faster in Blender 2.8. So I'm going to open up Blender 2.8 and open up. Gives me a little error, but it's fine. I don't need to stress too much about it. The tree comes in great. Okay, so same tree, just in Blender 2.8. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select my tree. I'm going to go to Object, Apply, and Make Instances Real. In Blender 2.9, this is something called Make Particles Real. I've just had some issues with it. It's so fast in Blender 2.8. And what it did here is it made each of these twigs its own instance. And you can see that my tries jumped up to 212,000. If I had used my original regular grove twig, I think it would probably be somewhere in the order of 500,000 or 600,000 tries, maybe more, and that process would have taken a long time. But because I have the simplified twig, it goes really quickly. So now what I want to do is I just select everything here, starting with the first one, go down my list, the last one, and I'll go to Object and Join. So now they are one. This is a good time to do a save as, not a save. I don't want to overwrite my original file. So I want to keep that original file because I can go back into the Grove and I can edit it further. But I am going to call this, I'm going to save it to, I think, just my desktop for the moment. I'm going to call it Baked. Baking is like removing all the ingredients that are separate, and baking it together. It's now doesn't have any parameters to it. Okay, and then I have my oak here. I can now go in, I can move these just into my main collection, collapse this, and I can actually delete the hierarchy so I don't have any knowledge of the Grove's parameters. This always happens when I make a major step. It's like this big puff ball. All I really need to do is hide and show the trunk again. This happens from time to time. I'm going to save this again. I can now close this and go back into Blender 2.9, which generally I find is just a little bit of a better interface. And I'm going to open my baked file on my desktop. And I'll pick up from here. Okay, so now we've got just these couple things. Something funny happens now. You see here 208, 502 tries. If I go into this and I go into edit mode, oh, it's actually doing fine. Don't worry about that. I do need to do one quick thing, which is you see this wrench here, that's a modifier. I need to remove the modifier from my tree. And I can do this. I'll start with the twigs. I just X out to delete that modifier. I'll go into the tree. Can't edit the modifiers here. I have to go into the particles. And I'm just going to delete these. It's going to maybe do something funny as I delete these. Nope, it didn't do the puffball thing. I just need to do that to remove the modifiers. It just makes it behave better. And now I type, not quite yet. Now I save it. I need to do one last step because this is a bit high. Over 200,000 tries. It's a bit high for Unity. It's going to be slow. So I can't really simplify these twigs anymore because I already did that back when I made that very simple twig that I showed you. But I can edit the trunk a little. So I'm going to click on these leaves here and type H to just hide them. And then I'm going to go into edit mode for the trunk. Alright, I'm going to just pause for a second. I don't think I can. Alright, I was going to pause the recording. I can't, so I'll keep going. So here is where I can go in and I can simplify this tree a little. It's got a lot of vertices. That adds just faces or tries. So imagine here with each of these vertices, if I were to delete these, you would just have a bit of a straighter branch with not quite the curvature. Right? If I were to delete these vertices, you would have one continuous face. It might be a little bit less organic looking, but the trade-off is okay because in Unity we really need we need that trade-off. So we can, again, type A to select all and go to Mesh, Clean Up, and Decimate Geometry. So this ratio slider is how we can delete those vertices quickly over the whole tree. And what we'll do is we will actually choose a number less than 1, and that's like a percentage of the original vertex count. So if I do 0.5, that's 50% as many vertices as we have right now. So we basically cut it in half. Each time we do this, we lose some integrity to the tree. So I just type 0.5. I'll click down here to just apply that. And you can see that the tries went down quite a bit without really losing much character for this tree. But we can go further. So we could do like 0.3. You see, even further down, we can keep pushing. I'm going to zoom in a little. And just keep an eye on things. Try 0.2. Not bad, still pretty good. We got a really good low try count here. I'll push it all the way to 0.1. That's a bit much. You can see that you start to get some flattening. This really looks like a computer-made tree. So back up to 0.2. And I'll get out of edit mode. And it's still just sort of checking in here in the rendered view. These look a little funky, but they're going to be covered in leaves, so that's okay. Now's a good time to save again. So low try count, Alt-H to unhide my twigs. That's jumped back up because the twigs do contribute a lot, but it's 114,385 tries. That's about as good as it's going to get. This is a 30-year-old tree in the grove. This is I know that I can't get any less. I've simplified my twigs as much as I possibly can. I've decimated the tree trunk geometry. There's nothing else that I can get rid of for a mature tree. So now I type A to select all, object, and join. And now we have a tree that's ready for Unity. So I'm going to select it and go to File, Export, FBX. And I'm going to save it here as an FBX file. Okay. Now I'm going to move into Unity. What I have here in Unity is like a default scene with a little bit of vegetation placed around. So what I need to do now is import that tree I just made, and I need to make it have the appearance of natural materials and environmental behavior. So I'm going to make a new folder for just this tutorial so I can organize everything in here for what I'm about to show you. Go to Assets and import new asset. And I'm going to find that FBX. The Blender file would perform decently and probably import, but not as fast as the FBX. Look at how much smaller it is. So we're going to import the FBX. Even though technically I probably could import that Blender file. And now I'm going to stick it in the scene. I don't think I need to make a prefab because we're not going to use multiples of these, but if we were, I could take this and drag it down here and make an original prefab. So you have the option to do this if you want to reuse the same prefab over and over again. So the tree itself came in great, very fast, but what we do need to do is give it trunk and leaf materials. And because we're using Nature Manufacture, we want to build a lot of those off of the existing materials used in Nature Manufacture. It's going to make it so fast for us. So what I'll do for that is I will scroll down to Nature Manufacture Assets. I'll go into my forest, I think, and I'll use the beech tree. So we'll go into a prefab here, and we'll put this beech next to it. And we're going to use that as our starting point for a lot of this. Now, it's not just about how the material looks, it's about how it behaves. So when I go into game mode, because it'd be easy to make a material that looks right, but some of the best things about Nature Manufacture and why I love it is how it has this really dynamic wind movement. So I'm going to go around to the side so we can see these trees next to each other. And what you get here with the Nature Manufacturer, why I'm such a big fan, is really great looking light, shadow, and movement. That would take a lot of time to recreate by hand, and we don't need to do that. I'm going to just move this because my character is over here. So we'll be able to compare these side by side. So here's what I do to try to create species-specific materials based off of Nature Manufacturers. We have, for example, beech tree materials for leaves that we can use for our pin oak. Start by clicking on this, open the prefab, go to one of the LODs, find the material for the leaves. I copy it into my tutorial folder by holding down Control, and you should get a plus. And I could take the bark too, although I'm not sure I want to use that in the end. I'm going to just copy it. And now get back out to my scene view. So to start with, I've got my beech leaf texture. I'm just going to rename it Pin Oak. I can actually change anything but the name, but I can drag it right on here. And you see that it's got the beech leaf sort of mapped to each of the pin oak leaves. So, and just so it won't be distracting, I'm going to just drag the beech bark onto there. So what we'll see now, when I go into game mode, is that the tree is going to move much like its neighbor, the beech tree. Scale of the wind is a little different, and we can play around with that. That works pretty well. And we can also use any of the other materials from Nature Manufacture. So if I scroll down here to Nature Manufacture, and I go into, say, the Mountain Tree Pack materials, like sometimes for a pin oak, I might want to use more like a fir. Not that one. Something like that bark. They all work really well as long as they're from Nature Manufacture. I could also go in and change these textures the way I'm about to show you with the leaves if you want to generate different material textures. But for example, like the fir blows quite a bit more because it's a mountain tree. So when I go into game mode, you can actually see the whole tree, including the branches, sways quite a bit. Okay, we got to fix those leaves. So this is really fast. But you can see that the bark maps beautifully, and so let's go back into our tutorial. So we've got our pin oak texture material. I mean, a lot of the wind stuff down here you can play around with now that that's built into the shader properties. But what we really want to focus on are our base map materials, our normal map and our mask map. That's going to make these leaves behave exactly how we want them to. So the first one is easy. I'm going to my textures and actually get rid of these because these are what I'm going to show you how to make. So we have to choose the top or the bottom. I'm going to choose top here. Okay. Well, we can just take this material, this image, and drag it right onto here. It's not going to use the beech anymore. When I let go, it's going to use the oak. And you can see that it maps beautifully, just as as each of these materials were set up here in the grove. Not sure if this will make a difference, but I do sometimes go into the material image, and I check this one, MIP map, reserve coverage. It can make that tree look a little fuller from far away, and it did in fact have that change. And then sometimes I'll slide the alpha down a little bit. Actually had the opposite effect. Maybe I need to move it up. That didn't really do anything. It's okay. But the MIP maps does help it look fuller from far away. So if we stopped here, we would be pretty okay because we have the shape of the leaves is now mapped perfectly to the outline of the twig from Blender and the Grove. You can see out here, these look a little funny. There's no branches. Again, I don't worry about it too much because again, at least what I'm doing in my own research, it's modeling dozens or sometimes hundreds of trees, and we want to see their overall character, not so much each little branch. But I guess if that was something that mattered a lot to you, you could probably go into the twig and model like a really simple branch in its place. Okay, we need to have these two look less like the normal map for a beech, for example, and it needs to look like the one for a pin oak. Same thing for the mask map. Both of these really influence how the leaves look. You can see here it's catching the light and shadow a lot better than this one is. And that's because this material is still thinking that these are the beech leaf outline because we made a copy of the beech material. So I need to generate a normal map and I need to generate a mask map. I do this using a free software called Shader Map 4, which I'm going to use right now and I highly recommend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by referencing this pin oak top, and Shader Map 4 is automatically going to generate a normal map for me. So I'm going to open that up. It's going to render these for me, and it's going to even give me a little preview of that texture applied to like a 3D cylinder. Just wait for a minute. You can see that if I move my light source around, the leaves now have like a bumpiness to them. This is what we want for them to appropriately capture the light and shadow. So here is our bump map. You can a normal map. You can recognize it by it being a purple colored image. You can edit this in Shader Map 4 before you export it. Low is basically no bump. High is an extreme amount of bump. And you can see that it sometimes gets to be a little bit flickery. You want it to be right in the middle for leaves. The threshold of detail, you can sort of change those sliders. I think these are pretty good as are. But you can play around with them. I think for the normal map, they work great. So anyway, whenever you're happy with it, you just click on this little floppy disk icon, right? And you can change where it's gonna save to. I want it to go right there. You can change. I don't think you can change its file name. Anyway, you can change that after the fact. And I'm gonna click on that save floppy disk. And now in here, I have a beautiful normal map, all ready to go. So now all I need to do is 2 steps, drag that into my folder in Unity, and then I'm going to drag it in place here. And as I zoom in, I want to just keep an eye on the tree because you'll see that it automatically updates the texture on the tree. So now the way that the light is interacting with the tree responds to the shape of the pin oak leaf, not the beech leaf. The last one we'll do is the mask map. What I usually do, to be totally honest, I usually open up the mask in Photoshop because I just want to remember what goes where, and I'll click on channels. So I can see that, actually I'll probably just build it off of this one. We have black and white for the red and blue channels. Green is going to be our ambient occlusion, and this is going to be our bump map, this alpha channel. So we have a bump map already. That came with our twigs, but we need an ambient occlusion image, and so we're going to shader map for that as well. And it's right here. And again, we can edit that, and you can see what happens when you change the numbers here. I'm not going to, but you can play around with them. And I'm going to save that as well. Okay. So now that lives here, and I'm going to actually open that up in Photoshop. And it's a little bit light. I could go in and I could change it. I could change it here if I wanted it to be a little more intensified, or I could change it in shader map. I'll change it here, see what happens. I probably didn't actually need to do that. All right, so now I'm going to just refer back to this one. Remember where it goes, green. So I'm going to go into my layers, select all, copy, and my channels, I'm going to paste it into green. The other thing I'm going to do is just refer back to here. Red, I want to be black. This I want to be blue. So, blue, I want it to be white. So I'm going to go into my red channel, select all, cut, and blue is fine. Now you can see that I'm starting to get something for my mask map. The last thing I want to do is create a new channel. Creates an alpha channel. That's where I want to open up my bump. I need to make sure the image, this image size should map. Let me make sure. The ambient occlusion, I want to just make sure I have the same size image for both of these. So this is 2800. That's out of shader map. It's pin oak. It's just 2000. So I want to go in here and I want to just size the whole thing down to 2000 so that there's a perfect match. Now I can go ahead and copy this and paste it right into that alpha channel. And I can save this, or I guess in the new version of Photoshop, export it as a JPEG. And I'm going to call it MM for mask map. Save it to the desktop, just so I can keep track of it. Put that one in here. And now I'm going to put that mask map right here. This always happens. Sometimes it works better than others. I don't like the way that came out. So I'm just going to undo that step. We don't really need it. It's okay. I don't think it makes that much of a difference for the tree. As long as you have the image map and the normal map, you're pretty good. So let's just undo that step. I must have done something wrong with the mask map. But I'm not going to worry about it today. Probably what I needed to do is play around with my ambient occlusion. I can go back and do that, but I'll keep it moving. That's really it. So now if I go in and I do my walk around, you'll see that it works really well with that normal map. So I can go up to this tree, take a good look. I'll probably want to play around with those wind settings more. And I can do that easily by going in here, and I can bump my wind stiffness way down. I don't know if this will make much of a difference. I might have to play with it more, but we can take a quick look. Something weird happened there with the little twig that's at the very bottom. Anyway, we can play around with it a bit more. Maybe try something like that. We'll see if that makes any difference. That's better. Yeah. So I was previously working with a grove of, I think, 160 trees. And it was really slow. So I'm going to show you what we can do with this as the very last step. Is I'm going to duplicate this and move it. I'm going to quickly just make a huge grove. So what I'm going to do eventually for my project is I'm going to grow a bunch of these all together so that each one responds to the other in terms of light. And then I'm going to import them separately into here, into Unity. So I'll make a new game object. So here I have 16 of these. And I'm going to duplicate this game object 10 times. Just to show you how well it can handle these trees. So here we should have 160 trees. Just quickly copied and pasted. I'm going to eventually have these be 160 unique trees grown together in the grove. But for now, due to all of my decimating and the simplifying of the twigs, I can navigate this pretty quickly in first-person mode. If I hadn't done any of that decimating and the simplifying of twigs, this would be all but impossible to navigate, so it's really important that you do these. But with that brings us to the end of how you do this. You do have to do it one by one for each tree out of Blender, but it's worth it to get a sort of hand-grown group of trees, each of which responds to light and its neighbors equally. So there it is. I hope this is helpful. Thank you.